Hello and welcome to Live, Work, and Play, the new podcast from the City of Dalton government. I am Bruce Frazier. I'm the Communications Director for the City of Dalton, and we are launching this podcast to tell the story of what your local government is doing to accomplish what we've taken up first as sort of an unofficial motto, and then it's more or less become the official mission statement for the city's staff and leadership, and that is to make Dalton the best place to live, work, and play in Georgia, and really not just Georgia, but also the Southeast. This community has so much going for it, and we have so many cool things here, many of which residents and visitors already know about and already love, and even more that you might not know about. And we're hoping to use this podcast as another way to tell the world about Dalton. I'm not from Dalton. I was born and raised in Columbus, Georgia, and after graduating from the University of Georgia, go Dogs, I came here in 2002 to work at WDNN as a sports reporter. And in television news, you really, as a young reporter, have to go wherever the jobs are. And I came here because there was a job here, and the city really made an impression on me. I made some lifelong friends here. I made some professional contacts. And then when my TV news career came to an end a few years later, after working at a couple of other stations, including one back in my hometown, I was able to come back to Dalton. In 2008, I was working for a public relations job with the police department here. And, honestly didn't expect to be here more than a couple of years before my career would take me somewhere else. But I've been here ever since, and I'm happy to say that, and really, I intend to stay here. This is where I want to build my life. This is where my family and I are building our lives, and I can tell you that every day in City Hall and around the city, we are working to make sure that we have a community where people will want to stay, and also where people will want to come join us and live here, and that's Dalton. So for the first episode of Live, Work, and Play, there's really only one candidate for the first guest, and that is City Administrator Andrew Parker. In that role as City Administrator, you are basically the Chief Executive Officer of the city government, overseeing operations. You report to the elected mayor and the city council, and also to our residents, and you really are sort of charting the course for the city. So there's really nobody better to know what's going on in Dalton than you. So Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Bruce. It's exciting to be able to have the first series of these, and I hope over the next few months we'll have more that we can put out there and give the public an opportunity to really meet some of our key department head leaders throughout the city, and really look forward to continuing this.
So before we jump into the nuts and bolts of city government, let's talk a little bit about you and your career. You're from here. I knew you went to school over in Murray County. You're from the Northwest Georgia area, and this is really where your heart and your roots are. And talk about working your way up from the bottom. You started as part of the summer mowing crew with Public Works, and then worked your way all the way up to city administrator.
That's right. I think so many Daltonians have a similar story to me. Either they've stayed here in the area, or something's brought them back. I hear that story so much, especially from young families. There's just been something to cause them to get back to Dalton, and then once they are here, they don't want to be anywhere else. My story is I grew up in Chatsworth, graduated from Murray County High School. At that time, there was only one high school in the county. And obviously, Dalton and Chatsworth have been integrally linked since the mid-1800s. Dalton, at that time, was Cross Plains and was part of Murray County, and then Whitfield County formed in 1851. So even now, the federal government looks at Dalton and Chatsworth as the statistical area when they're looking at population and various points of data that they tracked. And my story with the city really started 2 generations before I was on the mow crew. My grandfather was actually a public works employee for the city of Dalton, and worked for many, many years for the public works department. He died pretty early in my childhood, and so I didn't get to really know him, but I think genetically we were linked from the fact that we both had a heart for serving the city, and in the realm of Public Works Department. I had an uncle that worked for Public Works. And so when I graduated high school, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I had an interest in music. I had an interest in production as far as audio and visual production. So it's, I guess, very fitting that we're doing our first vlog. But I I had the opportunity when I was 15 years old to come on the Mo crew, and I worked for the legendary Daltonian Coach Hayden Wagers, which our public works facilities are now named after. And he just instilled in me some values about making Dalton, even at that time, we didn't use the same terminology, but the best place to live, work, and play. And our role in that at Public Works was to mow the right-of-way, to pick up litter, to make sure that our gateways looked really good. And that was a vision Hayden, Coach Wagers, had even, almost 20 years ago when I worked for him, and got to meet a lot of great people. And the more time I spent over there at Public Works, I began to think that maybe music or production or whatever was not my calling. And so we had an opportunity for me to do some stormwater work. And as an intern, I got to do some inspections and testing with the stormwater requirements that we have with EPD. And from there, I changed my degree, or I set my degree as civil engineering, and I never looked back. Although in second year, when I was starting to take some of the harder core classes, I sort of regretted that decision, but pushed through as many students do, and graduated in 2010 from Southern Polytechnic State University, which a few years later was combined with Kennesaw State and still is today. They still call it the Southern Polytechnic College of Engineering at Kennesaw State University. An incredible place to kind of learn and grow in my career path. And about a week or so after I graduated, the person that held my first position had just left to go to the private sector, and it was a tough time. It was coming out of the 2008 recession, so many of my peers that I graduated with went out of state. I mean, they went to where they could find a job. But fortunately, based on the 2 or 3 years I had already spent as an intern, I was a great candidate at that time, and the city was a great candidate for me. And so, you blink, and here we are 13 years later. I never imagined transitioning, to City Hall as city administrator, but sometimes things just happen that way. And I came over, I was Public Works Director for a time, and I was Assistant Public Works Director prior to that, worked for legendary Public Works Director Benny Dunn, that served the city for many years, and GDOT prior to that. And he just continued to refine me. I mean, it was a raw product coming out of college. You think you know everything based on what you've learned, but you pretty quickly find out when it comes to putting those theoretical things that you learn into practice that it doesn't always translate like you expected it to. So he did a great job mentoring me, and I've had the pleasure to serve with him. And 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to come over to City Hall in this role. At that time, the thing that lured me to the position was, number one, I had a heart for the city. Number two, I had a great relationship with most of the department heads at that time. Some have moved on, some have retired, things like that. But and then third, the big thing was we had about a little over $50 million in capital projects on the book at that time. So I felt like my skill set was right to be able to, take on the challenge to help the city move forward with the capital projects, given that that's my background with infrastructure. And here we are 2 years later and still carrying out those projects, and made a lot of progress over the last 2 years, and it's something I look forward to carrying on as long as I can do it.
So you're an engineer by training, so obviously you have a lot of the project management experience that you use every day probably. But just take us through briefly what an average day in the life of a city administrator might look like. What all does that job entail that maybe somebody might not realize?
Well, the transition from Public Works Director gave me a good start because you always had to expect the unexpected. You didn't know if we were going to have a storm event come in or something like that changed the direction of your next day. And city administrator's office is a lot like that. I mean, generally speaking, we have a pretty regular cadence of meetings, council meetings, and of course the commissions and authorities that the city works with, or maybe as joint partners with the county on. And so I have a regular meeting cadence, but obviously things come up that you're not predicting, related to budget or related to, potentially a natural disaster or personnel matters. anything to do with finance, you've always got to expect the curveball to be thrown, and may not always hit it, but you're prepared to. And so my typical day is I come in and have an opportunity. I typically throughout the week try to touch base with all of our department heads, a couple times a week, just to kind of help them with their projects, any kind of finance or budget issue that they have, as well as any kind of personnel items that they're working through. And shortly after I came over as city administrator, we had a couple of department head vacancies. So that was one of my first tasks, was we've got to get these director positions filled, because Dalton operates with very strong department heads. They don't require a lot of micromanagement, because they're experts in their field. They've either been in the career 2 or 3 decades and have matured through their careers, or they've got the education to back it up. And so since I've been over at City Hall, I've had the pleasure in hiring 3 department heads. Caitlin Sharp, our Parks and Rec Director, was the first one. Chad Townsend, who replaced me as Public Works Director, and Jason James, who is our Court Administrator. And finally, just last week, appointed Todd Pangle as Assistant City Administrator. And so since I brought Todd on board, he's had a 2+ decade career already with the city. He knows the inner workings of the city as well as anybody. We have assigned certain areas of responsibility to one another, and so he'll be kind of the primary liaison to some departments. I will be primary liaison to others, and we'll both take on special projects as they come along, because those types of things come up quite often. And when I say special projects, I'm not necessarily talking about capital projects, but other things that the city does. There's a lot of professional credentialing with our departments to maintain certifications, to do things to stay in compliance with policy, and those may not always be the fun things, but they are important, and they're, I think, in a lot of ways what sets Dalton apart from its peers.
And then probably just a lot of emails, right?
A lot of emails. That was something that I was not quite expecting, the load of emails. And if you take a vacation, you usually pay for it for about 2 weeks following. But the other important thing about my position is that I serve as the primary liaison between the elected officials, who are the policymakers, and the department heads who carry out the mission and vision of the city on a daily basis. And that relationship has to stay in connection at all times, because local government is unlike really any business, in that you essentially have 5 policymakers that you're reporting to, each of them with different priorities, different concerns. And in my role, a lot of times you have to build consensus, and you've got to be able to vet things by having appropriate dialogue about it. Maybe, people may see that the council adopt an ordinance or a resolution or whatever, but what goes on behind the scenes is potentially 2 to 3 months worth of groundwork prior to that, with the department head, with their reporting commission or authority, to a point, of discussing it maybe at a finance committee with the mayor and council, and then, public information meetings. All those types of things actually occur for the most part before, policy is adopted or resolutions adopted. And so there has to be a lot of forward thinking in my role, and you may not always get it right, but you want to have a good process in place to minimize any kind of hiccups and make sure that communication's constantly flowing from the departments to the elected officials, and from the public to the elected officials. So I always say that public policy is not an exact science, and certainly I've recognized that over the last 2 years.
I remember the old Schoolhouse Rock. I'm not sure if everybody listening to this or watching this on YouTube will remember that, but they have the how a bill becomes a law. Here at the local level, sometimes things bubble up as ideas from the individual departments, whether it's the Parks and Rec department deciding that we have a space that could be a neat new park, or whether it's the Public Works department identifying a place identifying a place where we can do some road improvements or something like that, or whether it's from the other end where it's an elected official trying to contact us with something that they want to see addressed, or something from the staff level. So really, you play a lot of traffic cop, I would imagine.
Yeah, traffic cop or air traffic controller is another metaphor that I've used. As you say, in Georgia has historically always valued home rule, and that basically vests power with the local government to be able to decide, what are the services that the local officials want to offer to the public? What are the amenities? What are the local requirements that may be different as far as ordinances compared to other cities in Georgia? And so a lot of power is vested with local governments at the elected official level. And obviously there's state law that we have to comply with as far as local government can't preempt state law. But other than that, generally a lot of, what a community looks like is made up through local government. And as I said earlier, there's quite a bit of work that has to take place prior to something ever even being voted on to make sure that the finished product, serves the community well. And those are things that we try to retool. And every time, we make a mistake or we maybe don't have an outcome that's exactly what we want, we try to do an after-action assessment and prepare better in the future. And there are many responsibilities that the elected officials have that are not glamorous responsibilities, but important things like last night at the council meeting, the city council had to set the millage rate. We do that once a year in the fall, once the Board of Assessors work is complete on property values. And they are charged, by law to set the millage, and there's a lot of work that takes place, prior to that, them taking action to be able to put something like that in place.
So if I had to sum up the attitude, sort of where the city is moving right now, it's that we have a really wonderful place, and that we can make it even better. And so a lot of the stuff that's being worked on in the city of Dalton are projects to make what we've got even better. When I lived here the first time, they were just doing the streetscape renovations downtown. And at the time, some of those, the downtown area was a little bit sleepy, and now I don't know if you can draw a direct line between streetscape, but I think you can. Some of the investment that was made in downtown from a public standpoint led to some of the private investment down there. And now the downtown area is really booming. And then you add in Burr Park and things like that. So some of the other projects that we have on deck, we're hoping will have similar effects. And I thought we maybe could take a couple of minutes to talk about some of the things that you were excited about, that we as a city staff are excited about. For example, the Mill Line Trail that's being built, we expect it to be completed by the end of the year. We're recording this September 6th, in 2023. So in other communities that are both similar in size to Dalton and also places like Atlanta, some of those trail projects have really led to revitalization and growth. And we're hoping that this Mill Line project can do that here. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so one of the city's key focus areas the last 2 years has been revitalization. And as you alluded to, there's just been a complete resurgence of downtown Dalton following the 2008 recession. It's one of the incredible success stories, I think, around the state. Every storefront is full. As you mentioned, Burr Park has a ton of events, and you're almost in awe. I attended Pops in the Park, among other events, this summer, and it was almost an emotional moment to see 2,000 of your colleagues from the community, lay aside any differences and come out to be together from different walks of life, different backgrounds. It was an emotional moment for me, and I couldn't help but take photos and videos of the crowd. And we hope to continue over the next 5 years that effort of revitalization that we've experienced in downtown following the recession. And as you mentioned, one of the key ways of doing that we've seen from other communities that have had success with revitalization efforts are these, interconnected trail systems within the city itself. Our friends in Gainesville a few years ago built a trail called in their Midland district that they've shared with me has just seen untold investment from private developers along the trail because it's a place people want to be. It's a connecting spine that connects where you live with where you work with where you play. And so Dalton's version of that was cast many years ago, actually. I can't take credit for it. That's the thing with public policy. I had a mayor just last week in a meeting from out of town say, the decisions we're making today, hopefully future elected officials will be able to reap the benefit of 10 or 20 years to come. And we are seeing those things play out right before us in Dalton. Heritage Point Park, for example, was a vision cast 20 years ago that's just now being totally complete. Same thing with Streetscape, a vision cast over 20 years ago that's just now coming to completion. So the trail project, the Mill Line, was a vision that was really put together when I first started with the city. There was an effort to revitalize downtown, and there was even a theme about a green hat on downtown Dalton. And obviously the project has evolved and been refined since that time, but the idea is to have an interconnecting trail system that starts at Hagmill Lake Park, which has been just an incredible success story following the completion of that SPLOST project, to downtown Dalton by way of the Crown Mill. So this first phase that we're working on that's actively under construction is a 1.1 mile trail segment that's a family-friendly, multi-use path, wide enough you can ride a bike, you can walk a stroller or walk a dog, push a stroller or walk a dog, and pass people comfortably, ADA compliant, so that all of Dalton's users can take advantage of having this system. And it's a part of town that has been, undeveloped, with access, beautiful access and views to Mill Creek and Hagmill Lake Creek that runs from Hagmill Lake Reservoir, views that our community is not able to enjoy right now that they will be able to on this 1.1 mile segment from the Crown Mill area to Hagmill. And then the current construction scope of work also includes almost another half-mile spur to the west where there's some undeveloped property that I think will be much more desirable after the trail is built. And then for future phases, the city's hired a consultant that has specialized in urban trail planning to help us map out the routing of the trail from the Crown Mill area back into downtown. And I think the vision we all have is that one day, we'll have that connection to downtown, and then even further, connecting further south to Lakeshore Park, which has become a huge hub for our recreation department, and Al Rollins Park. And as you mentioned, that there are just some tremendous natural resources that we have in North Georgia, especially in Dalton, with beautiful mountains, water features everywhere. Sometimes those present challenges on the infrastructure side of things, but in terms of amenities and quality of life, it paints a perfect backdrop for this spine trail that hopefully over the next decade or so, or 2 decades, we'll be able to see through. And as I said earlier, you plant these visions and make these plans, and sometimes with government it takes just a little bit longer because we have certain requirements that the private sector doesn't have with bidding and things like that. But the council showed a real initiative to get that project started. The current scope of work is about $2.2 million, and we've seen costs rise following the pandemic, and this is a project that certainly that applies to. But they saw the vision, and obviously we've seen from our peers what this interconnected trail system can do in terms of economic development, revitalization of some of our oldest neighborhoods. This trail segment in particular runs through one of our oldest neighborhoods in town called Crown Mill, North Dalton. It's a mill village surrounding the Crown Mill, and a lot of the housing conditions have declined, over the course of 75 to 100 years. And we've already seen developers, risk takers, private money coming into that area and renovating homes, all the while not really displacing anybody. Risk takers coming in, building new homes, renovating older mill homes and making it a really nice place for families to live. And I think, for any young family, it's going to be a desirable place to be if the revitalization efforts continue, because you're so connected to everything in the community with downtown Hag Mill, Mill Creek, and potentially down the road even further trail connections to Heritage Point and other places. So we've even had some talks, with the county at a very preliminary level about maybe one day connecting Hag Mill to their recently opened Rocky Face Ridge Park, because we have a ton of cyclists in the community, folks that travel to Dalton to ride their bikes. Our infrastructure right now is not perfect for that, and that's why we've got to continue making these investments to make it a trail system that will work for the majority of users.
And the history of that Crown Mill area is really cool. I did not know a lot of that history, not having grown up here. And then when the Young Game Changers were in town last year, I listened to a presentation and learned a lot about that area, with a lot of the development that grew up around the mill, just with people who lived in that area, or rather worked in that mill and wanted to live in that area, and they built a lot of the prefab homes around it. And there are some, like you said, there are some people investing money in that area now that are trying to bring it back to life, bring back some of the character of that neighborhood that, in terms of the architectural style of the homes that are there, and just trying to really honor the history of the neighborhood while also, breathing a little bit of new life into it. And that's very exciting. And also, you mentioned all these parks that this trail system can connect. One of the cool things about this community is just the incredible amount of stuff that you can do outside here. I grew up in Columbus, which is, in South Georgia, and you had to ride in the car for a while before you could get to the mountains, before you could get to really fun hiking areas, great places to ride your bicycle, great places to run. And we have all that here, and I think maybe we take it for granted, but it's just another great thing about living in Dalton. Real fast, let's talk a little bit about the John Davis Center renovation, because that is something here in the fall of 2023 we're working on and we're very excited about. You talk about historic areas of our community. The John Davis Center has been the heart of our recreation department for decades, and we are going to make it a really special place again.
Yes, it was the heartbeat of the department. Unfortunately, due to age, the building really got in decline the last few years of operation. So the voters approved a project there, and we went through several concept reviews about what made most sense to do, what was the most economic, what was going to give us the best product, and we made the decision in conjunction with builders and architects and professionals to renovate a portion of the building, the administrative offices space, and but we looked at the rest of the site, and we determined we needed a new basketball gym, some new assembly spaces. There's an existing assembly room over the administrative offices that have some incredible views. From what I understand, in years past, a lot of the local civic clubs actually met there because it's a room that can probably seat, 150 people. And like I said, it's on the second floor, incredible views. So that's being renovated, a new gym. One of the most popular things at James Brown Park is the pool. We have a 50-meter pool that is heated, and so we have, believe it or not, year-round swimmers. Even in the winter, they'll run the heat on the pool, and it attracts a lot of folks. We have a very active, large local swim club for a community Dalton size, and that's been one of the themes, is to continue to reinvest in our park system. Luckily, on this one, we had SPLOST proceeds, and so the plans have been wrapped up on that new project, and hopefully very soon, later this fall, the public will start to see that project go vertical. We're very excited about it. Our Parks and Rec staff has been involved with the design of it, so we've been able to customize the spaces for their needs today and their needs in the future. And even after that project, we want to make James Brown Park more interconnected, because it's split almost perfectly in half by a tributary to Mill Creek. And so the east side of the park feels disconnected from the west side of the park. And one of the things we're talking about is some pedestrian bridges across the creek, maybe a dog park. We've had a lot of requests for that. And so we're just trying to paint a vision for what that park can be, because, again, it's in a key part of our community. It's right in the heart of of Northeast Dalton, a big residential area, close to schools, close to downtown. And I think this project, that's about a $7 or $8 million project to renovate the building and build new features, is going to be a key step in doing that.
And then really briefly, because this gets very technical, and I know that you're an engineer and you love this stuff, but I'm not sure everybody understands as much about it. We have been talking a lot over the past couple of years about stormwater projects, and this is something that the city is investing a large amount of money into and a lot of effort into. And the short version of the reason why is because it's essential. We had, more than 100 years of growth and development here in the city before we really had a stormwater plan. And I guess from a layman's perspective, basically anytime you put a house down, anytime you put a factory down, anytime you put down a concrete parking lot, that is an area where rainwater can no longer permeate into the ground, and so it has to run off. And we have areas of this community now that have flooding problems because of all the unchecked development. And so we have been working over the past several years to work on a lot of different projects that are correcting that issue, whether it be there have been some locations in strategic areas where we have acquired properties, raised the homes, and then built stormwater areas where the water can permeate. We've built a structure in the cemetery that basically will slow down that stormwater and allow it more time to enter into the water system to reduce flooding concerns. And we've got a lot more projects like that on the books. So just tell us a little bit about why that's important, and maybe give me an overview of what's coming up next with that type of work.
Yeah, so that was one of the key charges I had from the council when I came over to City Hall, is we've got to get our handle on the stormwater challenges that our city faces. As you alluded to, Dalton celebrated its 175th birthday last December. So there were basically 175 years of development, and the first stormwater management ordinance was not put into place until 2006. So basically anything developed prior to 2006 was not required to think about stormwater in terms of how is it going to affect my neighbor? How is it going to affect neighbors half a mile down the road? And since that time, everything that's been built has had to look at that, and they've had to add engineers to plan for addressing runoff. The problem is now correcting locations where we do have issues, where we maybe don't have property to resolve it. This is a lot easier to resolve on the front end than it is the back end. And so what we did is engage a consultant that had a lot of experience throughout Georgia and throughout the United States of helping communities put together a plan. So we did that. It took about a year to kind of catalog all of the issues. These issues could range from people's homes actually flooding, property loss due to stream bank erosion. As I mentioned earlier, we have all these natural resources, but with steep slopes and low valleys, it presents challenges in terms of the velocity of the stormwater runoff, as well as floodplains. There's a lot of stuff that had been built decades ago that probably today, under today's codes, would not be permitted because of the risk or propensity for flooding. And so, as I said, it's a lot harder to address these things after the fact, but we're marching forward with that. It's a difficult thing to talk about because a stormwater infrastructure is typically a buried asset. So,
so you don't see it, basically.
You don't see it. So with water and sewer, a homeowner obviously recognizes the value of having clean drinking water and the ability, to have a wastewater connection where you don't have a septic tank. But the connection mentally to stormwater is a little bit different if you're not having problems. If you're not one of the households that are having problems, this situation may not resonate with you. So we've tried to be able to present that in terms of the number of folks that this affects in the city. And as you mentioned, the plan that we've developed in conjunction with the experts gives us probably a catalog of about 20 to 30 projects that need to take place to really get a good handle on this for the long term. Some of those projects involve property acquisition, as you mentioned, to be able to put these detention ponds or flood control sites where they need to be. You can't obviously you can't put a detention pond up on top of the hill in the highest part of the watershed. There's a logical place for it to be based on what Mother Nature drives it to be. And so the city has committed significant dollars to this problem without raising taxes. We've been able to do it through bond proceeds as well as SPLOST funds. And those funds have been pooled to start executing that plan. And we've already started to see meaningful results. I can't tell you how many calls I've gotten on some of the projects you mentioned where folks are already starting to see a big difference in the problems of the past. So we will continue to carry that forward. We've got a team at Public Works that is managing those projects in conjunction with my office. We're in very capable hands with a consultant we've hired, and so we look forward to being able to continue to announce those projects as time goes on.
And, when a road floods, when an area of town floods, that is not just damaging to property, but that also grinds the economy to a halt too.
Exactly.
Because you can't ship things in and out of these production facilities, and they can't get the materials they need to keep working, and they can't get their personnel in and out. So there are a number of different layers to that problem, which make it very sort of important to tackle. Earlier, I mentioned that you get a lot of emails. One of the things about your position is that you are one of the points of contact for the public when they have problems. People might not realize it, but you go through your emails and you respond to them all, which is something I respect because I get not even a fraction of the amount of emails that you receive. And it can become a daunting task. But the reason I bring that up is because I was thinking, the people that work for the city of Dalton, we get the biggest kind of thrill and satisfaction in our jobs when we can help the residents solve a problem, whatever they might be dealing with, whether it be, an issue with a stormwater project or even just something maybe more complex than that, more simple than that. I was wondering if you could tell us a story about maybe a time when a resident contacted you with an issue and you were able to sort of leverage the city of Dalton's assets to help bring about a resolution.
I think one of the neatest recent stories that I think folks can relate to is the total revitalization of the East Moore Street block between Glenwood Avenue and Green Street. Some private developers took a chance there. It was a dated corridor with not a lot of activity, and they started acquiring property and really started reinvesting into some of the buildings there. And they had already started making that investment when they reached out to our elected officials and my office and our public works staff. And they said, we've got some exciting things going on, but the infrastructure on this block is just, in very poor condition. There were trip hazards. The sidewalks were not ADA compliant. There were metal grates laying across the sidewalk. As I mentioned earlier, we're an old city, so we've got old infrastructure, and over a time, we've got a plan to work on these things. But and certainly this was a location that was kind of in the pipeline, but the schedule changed a little bit as we saw how quickly the block was being redeveloped, and we were pretty quickly able to direct some resources to fixing that because we saw the need beyond just the economic development opportunity. There was a public safety issue with the condition of the sidewalks and so much more pedestrian traffic on that block. And we just recently, probably a year ago, wrapped up that project, which didn't just involve new sidewalks. It also involved a lot of backbone infrastructure replacements, stormwater drain replacements, utility replacements. So there's a lot of things that had to take place to make that project a reality. But the Public Works Department came in, made it happen, and today we're all able to enjoy the successes of that project. And it was one on my mind as you asked this question that we were able to respond to fairly quickly and make happen and make a reality.
So, that's that East Morris area, such a cool area, and that's another one of the things that's making this community so great. It seems like every week over the summer, something new was opening in town, whether it be a new restaurant, new entertainment venue. That East Morris area is booming. And so much of that has to do with private investment and also public investment and partnerships. And so that's just some of the stuff that we're really excited about here in the city of Dalton. And that's what we're hoping to highlight here with this podcast as we go forward. We're hoping that, whether you're listening to us on a podcast platform or whether you're watching on YouTube, I hope you will like and subscribe so that when we put up future episodes, you'll be the first to hear them. We're going to be putting together a schedule in the coming months to highlight a lot of what's going on around the city of Dalton. Want to thank the Audrey Simmons and the staff here at the Matt Gaston Community Center for hosting us here in the new podcast lab, which is a really cool resource. And, if you were listening to us in the podcast form, chances are you like podcasts. If you've ever wanted to start your own, it is so easy to do. You can come in here and use the equipment that's here at the facility and make your own podcast. And maybe you can become internet famous here. And that's just another one of the cool things that not a lot of communities have, and we're very proud of here in Dalton. Andrew, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be the first guest on this podcast and to tell everybody in town what we're excited about here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
This fall, we got a lot of cool stuff coming up. In mid-September, we're going to be having another Off the Rails concert in Burr Park. And October 15th, that's a Saturday night, we're going to have the Rumors Fleetwood Mac concert downtown that got rained out over the summer. There's a lot of cool stuff happening here in the early fall, and it's going to be happening all year long. So keep an eye on the Downtown Dalton Facebook page, the DaltonEvents.com page. You can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/City of Dalton. We have all sorts of places where we're trying to get the word out about everything that's going on in town. Keep an eye on daltonga.gov. Another thing we wanted to emphasize here on this podcast is that all of this only works when the community pulls together and participates. So we really want to invite people to participate in city council meetings. We want people to speak up and be heard when they have an opinion about, which direction the community should be going. And there's times where the public can comment on those things, and we have just so many opportunities for citizens to serve on boards and commissions. Tell me a little bit about just the importance of folks participating.
Yeah, I think in my experience with the city, especially in this new role, to me, what I've observed is the elected officials are much more compelled by the public actually taking time to come to the meeting, provide comment on the current issues. It may be something inconsequential, or it may be, something that's a big change that's proposed. And obviously they're getting a lot of objective data from staff, but in order to gain a sense of idea for what the community feels like, if they'll come to council meetings, the first and third Mondays of the month are the regular scheduled meetings. If we have to make a change due to a holiday or something like this week with Labor Day, it's usually the Tuesday. But the first and third Mondays of the month, every month, council meets at City Hall in the council chambers at 6 o'clock. And at the very front of the agenda, there's a time for public comment. And the mayor will call the member of the public to the mic, and you can talk about anything really going on in the city, whether it's a problem or you just want to update the council on, hey, we've got this cool event coming up and we'd love to see you, or love to spread awareness about the event. So there's really no limit to what you can talk about, and that's a great way for the council to hear directly what the citizens are thinking and hearing and that kind of thing. But also we recognize following the pandemics and just in the 21st century, we updated all of our audiovisual equipment in the council chambers 6 months ago so that we can better stream the meetings live to YouTube and Facebook, and actually record them as well, so that if somebody's busy and there was an item of interest to them on the agenda, they can go back and pull it up on YouTube at any time. You just go to YouTube and type City of Dalton, GA, or follow us on Facebook, and all the videos are posted there. Also, any other public meetings, like we had just a couple weeks ago, a parade safety informational meeting that was open to the public. Typically, we live stream those. So again, if you can't make it out, you can watch it either live or on demand afterward. And again, making contact. All of the council members have their emails and phone numbers on the website, as do the department heads. We want to operate. Dalton is a small enough community, still a large community during the day with the industry, but in terms of the resident population, that everybody knows one another. Just feel free to reach out on the phone or email, or come to a public meeting, and we'll try to address your concerns or take your comments under consideration.
And one of the most famous examples of that, the skate park that's over there in the John Davis complex. A teenage resident came to the city council one day and said, there's not enough cool stuff for teenagers to do. We would love to have a skate park. And then I guess within a year, the Parks and Recs department had put that together. So you might not be able to get things done in Washington, but you can get things done here in Dalton, Georgia. And we really are trying to make this community the best place for everybody that lives here. And we're really working hard on that.
That's right.
Okay, so we tried to get this done in about 30 minutes. We got it done in instead of about 45, but I think it's a lot of great information that I think people will hopefully enjoy getting, and hopefully going forward, we can keep this podcast going and get the message out there.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks, Andrew.